On November 13, 2022, four University of Idaho students were found brutally murdered inside their home. No forced entry, no clear motive, and for weeks, no suspect. The case shocked the entire country and led investigators to an unexpected name: a criminology PhD student living minutes away. On the night of November 12, 2022, the four University of Idaho students followed their usual weekend routines. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogan spent the night out together and returned to the King Road house shortly before 2 a.m. Zana Kernodle and her boyfriend Ethan Chapin came home around the same time after attending a fraternity event. Two other roommates were already in their bedrooms. Between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., all six occupants were inside the house. Nothing unusual was reported during that period. The timeline becomes critical starting around 4 a.m., when investigators believe the suspect approached the house and entered through a sliding glass door on the second floor. According to evidence and the surviving roommate's account, the attack began shortly after entry. Kaylee and Madison, who were asleep on the third floor, were the first victims. They were stabbed multiple times in their beds with no signs indicating they were able to escape or call for help. The attacks were fast and violent. On the second floor, Zana and Ethan were awake during the assault. Zana had food recently delivered and was active on her phone around 4 a.m. Ethan was attacked near the doorway of Zana's room. Zana was attacked last. Autopsy findings later indicated she attempted to defend herself. The entire sequence of murders is believed to have occurred within a matter of minutes. At approximately 4:17 a.m., one surviving roommate opened her bedroom door after hearing crying from Zana's room. She then saw a masked man dressed in black walking toward the exit. She did not recognize him. The man passed her, left through the sliding door, and fled the house. The roommate locked her door and did not call police at that time, later explaining she was scared and unsure of what she had witnessed. After the attacker left, the house remained quiet for hours. No one inside realized that four of the residents had been killed. It wasn't until almost noon on November 13 that one of the surviving roommates called friends to come over, believing someone in the house might be unconscious. A 911 call was then placed requesting help for an unresponsive person. Responders arriving on scene discovered the four victims and immediately recognized the situation as a homicide. The murders had occurred roughly 8 hours earlier. At that moment, the suspect was already far from the scene, leaving investigators with no immediate leads. The initial reaction was confusion. The 911 call did not mention a stabbing or a break-in, and the surviving roommates had not realized what happened overnight. Police arriving at the scene quickly recognized the situation as a homicide involving a sharp-edged weapon. The house was sealed off, and investigators began documenting each room. Inside, officers found a knife sheath on the bed near Madison and Kaylee. This single item became the most important piece of evidence in the early stages. The sheath was marked K-Bar, a brand associated with military-style knives. Crucially, investigators recovered a DNA sample from the snap button of the sheath. The scene itself contradicted early theories circulating online and in local rumors. There was no sign of forced entry, which eliminated the idea of a break-in. The surviving roommates were unharmed and stayed on the first floor, contradicting assumptions that the killer must have entered through their level. The house also showed no signs of theft, removing robbery as a motive. The layout clarified the order of events. The third floor showed no evidence of struggle, indicating Madison and Kaylee were attacked in their sleep. The second floor, where Zana and Ethan were found, showed signs of movement and defensive injuries, confirming they were awake during the attack. This destroyed theories that the killer targeted specific victims based on personal connections. Police immediately focused on the method: a single attacker using a fixed-blade knife, moving through the house with speed and intention. The presence of the sheath suggested the killer acted quickly and left in a hurry, possibly not realizing he dropped it. By the end of the first day, investigators knew the murders were deliberate, targeted, and carried out by someone who understood how to move through a home without waking everyone inside. But they still had no name. Only a DNA profile sitting on a sheath that should never have been left behind. As soon as police confirmed that 4 students had been murdered, the atmosphere in Moscow changed immediately. The public knew almost nothing about the killer, the motive, or how someone entered a house with 6 people inside. With no suspect and no clear explanation, fear spread across campus within hours. Students began leaving town the same day the victims were identified. Dorms emptied, apartment complexes cleared out, and parents drove in from different states to remove their children from the campus. Those who stayed avoided walking alone and kept their doors locked at all times. The University of Idaho responded by shifting classes online. Faculty were told to accommodate students who had already left or refused to return. Campus police increased patrols, but the lack of answers only made people more anxious. Students wanted reassurance, and investigators couldn't give it. The term targeted attack was used publicly, but without details, it created more confusion than clarity. Social media filled the information gap. Rumors spread rapidly. Multiple attackers, a stalker, revenge, a crime of passion, a drug connection. None of these claims came from law enforcement, but they circulated widely across TikTok, Reddit, and true crime forums. Innocent people were falsely accused by online users who had no access to the case. The speculation grew so intense that police later had to address specific rumors during press conferences just to shut them down. The pressure on the Moscow Police Department escalated quickly. This was a small agency dealing with a major homicide under national scrutiny. Reporters flooded into the town, cameras lined the streets, and every statement from investigators was dissected and criticized. Families wanted answers, students demanded safety, and the public questioned whether the police were capable of solving the case. Days turned into weeks with no arrest. Each day without progress increased the tension. The community felt exposed, vulnerable, and unsure if the killer was still nearby. Despite the growing panic, investigators continued working quietly in the background, focusing on forensic evidence, surveillance footage, and digital data. But to the public, the silence felt like failure. Many believed the killer might never be caught. That pressure would only intensify, until a small piece of DNA on a knife sheath finally pointed to a suspect. Investigators reviewed every piece of available footage from the neighborhoods surrounding the King Road house. This included security cameras from homes, businesses, and campus buildings. While scanning hours of recordings, detectives noticed a consistent detail: a white Hyundai Elantra passing near the victim's home multiple times during the early morning of the murders. This was the first solid lead. The car was seen driving through the area at least 3 times before 4 a.m., then speeding away from the neighborhood shortly after the estimated time of the attacks. Although the footage didn't reveal the license plate, the pattern was clear. The driver was circling the house before the murders and leaving immediately afterward. Realizing the importance of the vehicle, investigators issued a nationwide alert asking for information on any 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra. They weren't accusing anyone. They simply needed to locate every car of that type to determine who had been near the crime scene. Their request was one of the widest vehicle searches ever connected to a homicide investigation. Leads started coming in from around the country, but most were dead ends. Rental cars, used cars, cars sold privately, thousands fit the description. Despite the overwhelming list, analysts continued eliminating vehicles one by one. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered a white Elantra registered to a graduate student living in Pullman, Washington. just a short drive from Moscow. That student was Brian Koberger, a criminology PhD candidate at Washington State University. The connection immediately stood out. Koberger lived close to the crime scene, his vehicle matched the one seen on surveillance, and his academic background aligned with the organized nature of the attack. Detectives began quietly investigating his movements. They reviewed his registration, checked his residence, and pulled traffic camera data from the night of the murders. The routing of his car matched what investigators had seen in the surveillance footage. For the first time since the murders, police had a suspect who made sense on paper. Proximity, matching vehicle, suspicious movements, and a background that required a closer look. The white Elantra did not solve the case on its own, but it pointed investigators directly toward Washington State University and the man they would soon identify as their primary suspect. After identifying the white Elantra, investigators focused on building a forensic case around the suspect. The most important physical evidence remained the K-bar knife sheath recovered next to two of the victims. Crime lab analysts developed a single male DNA profile from the snap button of the sheath, a clean sample with no mixture. With a potential DNA lead in hand, detectives moved to digital evidence. They obtained cell tower data connected to the suspect's phone number. The records showed that his phone stopped transmitting signals for several hours during the exact window of the murders. Before that blackout period, the phone had traveled toward the victim's neighborhood. After the murders, the phone reconnected and moved back toward Pullman. Investigators also performed a link analysis combining surveillance footage, traffic camera timestamps, and tower pings. The route of the white Elantra seen near the crime scene matched the phone's movements almost exactly. The pattern showed the car circling the neighborhood repeatedly before 4 a.m. and leaving moments after the estimated time of the attack. To confirm the DNA connection, investigators conducted a genetic genealogy search. They compared the crime scene DNA to public genealogy databases and built a partial family tree. The results pointed toward the Koberger family. Detectives then performed a targeted trash collection from outside the suspect's parents' home. DNA from that trash sample, taken from a discarded item, was tested against the sheath DNA. The results showed a strong parental link, indicating that the male who left DNA on the sheath was the biological child of the person identified from the trash sample. That match, combined with the Elantra lead in the phone data, gave investigators the level of confirmation they needed. By this stage, the case no longer relied on a single clue. It had become a layered forensic timeline: DNA on the sheath, digital movement of the phone vehicle route, tied to surveillance and genealogy confirmation through family DNA. Each piece reinforced the others, all pointing toward the same individual. This combination of physical and digital forensics allowed investigators to move forward with full confidence that they had identified their suspect. With the forensic evidence pointing toward Brian Koberger, investigators examined who he was and whether anything in his background aligned with the crime. Koberger was a criminology PhD student at Washington State University. His area of study focused on criminal behavior, offender decision-making, and how killers plan, choose victims, and escape detection. He had previously earned a master's degree in criminology, where he wrote papers analyzing the psychology of criminals and how their choices reveal patterns. People who knew him described a mix of traits: socially awkward, highly analytical, and often overly serious. Some classmates said he would dominate conversations, correcting others or steering discussions toward topics involving control and criminal behavior. Others noticed behavioral quirks: sudden mood changes, long stares, and a habit of inserting himself into conversations without reading the room. Professors described him as academically strong but difficult. He questioned grading, argued over small details, and sometimes acted dismissive toward peers. Despite this, he was never viewed as violent or threatening, which made his identification as a suspect shocking to those around him. Students in his PhD program reported that he acted differently after the murders. Before November 13th, he was engaged and talkative. After the killings, he became quiet, withdrawn, and appeared distracted. He also stopped participating in normal discussions and seemed to lose interest in ongoing research. What stood out most was how he didn't fit the typical profile of a violent offender. He had no known criminal history, no documented acts of aggression, and no behavioral incidents that signaled he could be capable of a quadruple homicide. He lived a structured academic life, worked as a teaching assistant, graded papers, and interacted daily with students and faculty. Nothing about his past suggested a person who would be on law enforcement's radar. He blended into a normal university environment, surrounded by other students pursuing advanced degrees. Even after investigators revealed his identity, many who knew him struggled to connect the person they interacted with to the nature of the crime. This contrast, a criminology student accused of committing a crime he studied, only intensified the public's fascination with the case. And as investigators dug deeper, they focused on one question: how someone who appeared so ordinary could be linked so strongly to such a brutal event. As investigators built their case around Brian Koberger, they monitored his movements closely. By late December, he had left Washington State University and driven across the country to his parents' home in Pennsylvania. Law enforcement in Idaho coordinated with the FBI and local authorities to maintain surveillance while they finalized the arrest warrant. During the cross-country trip, investigators tracked his phone activity, vehicle records, and credit card use. Once in Pennsylvania, agents established continuous monitoring. They watched his habits, the vehicles at the residence, and any movements in and out of the house. They wanted a controlled and safe arrest, especially with a suspect believed to be capable of extreme violence. When the warrant was signed, a specialized team executed the arrest at around 1 a.m. They approached the home quietly, then breached the front door with force. Koberger was taken into custody without major resistance. He reportedly appeared confused and disoriented when confronted by armed officers. The operation was fast, controlled, and designed to prevent any risk to the family inside the home. The arrest stunned his parents and sister. Until that moment, they had no indication he was under investigation. To them, he had simply returned home for winter break. The sudden arrival of a SWAT team, combined with the accusations, left the family shocked and overwhelmed. None had publicly suggested they suspected him of involvement. After the arrest, investigators searched the family home, multiple vehicles, and electronic devices. They seized items including computers, phones, gloves, and packaging materials. They also obtained DNA swabs directly from Koberger to confirm the match with the knife sheath. In addition, they examined his white Hyundai Elantra, looking for fiber evidence, possible blood transfer, and anything that might connect the vehicle directly to the crime scene. Every item collected was transported for forensic analysis. The goal was simple: strengthen the chain of evidence already built through DNA, digital tracking, and vehicle movement. Koberger's arrest ended 6 weeks of fear, speculation, and uncertainty. But for investigators, it was only the beginning. The evidence gathered in Pennsylvania would now be tested, analyzed, and prepared for what would become one of the most closely watched criminal cases in the country. After Koberger's arrest, investigators focused on organizing every piece of evidence into a clear, structured case. The list was extensive: the DNA from the knife sheath, surveillance recordings showing the white Elantra circling the neighborhood, cell tower data mapping the phone's movements, and forensic items seized from his home and car. Each category had to be verified, cross-checked, and prepared for presentation in court. The prosecution strategy centered on one goal: demonstrating that multiple independent forms of evidence all pointed to Koberger. The DNA linked him physically to the crime scene. The car route aligned with the timeline of the murders. The phone data connected his location before, during, and after the attack, and his early morning return to the area hours later added to the pattern. None of these pieces were presented as standalone proof. The strength came from how they supported one another. At the same time, the defense immediately began challenging the foundation of the case. Their early approach focused on questioning the reliability and handling of the DNA. They argued that the genealogy process used to narrow in on Koberger needed deeper scrutiny and claimed the defense had not been given full access to the methods used to generate the match. They also targeted the surveillance footage, arguing that the vehicle identification was based on partial images and could be interpreted differently. Another point of challenge was the cell tower data. The defense claimed that tower connections could not pinpoint exact locations and that phone movement alone could not prove involvement in the crime. They also suggested alternative explanations for why the suspect's phone went dark during the time frame of the murders. These disputes led to repeated motions, hearings, and requests for evidence review. As both sides prepared, the case became heavily affected by procedural delays. Each motion, whether about DNA, forensic lab records, or digital evidence, extended the timeline. This pushed hearings back and slowed progress toward a trial date. Meanwhile, media coverage remained constant and intense. Every court filing, hearing date, and defense argument was dissected publicly. The involvement of national news networks and the explosive online interest made it one of the most covered criminal investigations in recent years. The court had to balance transparency with protecting the integrity of the case, leading to further restrictions and scheduling issues. By this stage, the framework of the case was clear. Prosecutors believed they had a strong, multi-layered system of evidence, while the defense pushed to dismantle each component before it ever reached a jury. The legal battle was now fully underway, and the outcome would depend on how the court weighed science, technology, and procedure. As court delays continued and more forensic evidence solidified the case against him, Koberger's defense team shifted their strategy. Instead of pushing for a full trial, they entered discussions with prosecutors about a possible plea deal. The decision came after a review of the DNA match, the digital timeline, the vehicle analysis, and the extensive supporting evidence. The defense understood that a jury trial carried overwhelming risk. Ultimately, Koberger agreed to plead guilty to all 4 counts of first-degree murder. The plea was structured to remove the possibility of the death penalty. In exchange, prosecutors secured a guaranteed conviction without putting the victims' families through the trauma of a lengthy trial, graphic evidence, and appeals that could have lasted decades. During the sentencing hearing, the courtroom was full, and the families of the victims were given the chance to speak. Their statements were direct and emotional. They described the impact of losing their children, the fear that took over their community, and the toll the investigation had taken on their lives. Some addressed Koberger directly, expressing anger, devastation, and the years of grief they would continue to carry. Others focused on remembering their loved ones rather than acknowledging him at all. Koberger offered a brief statement acknowledging his plea, but it did not change the atmosphere in the room. The focus remained on the victims and the finality of the outcome. The judge delivered the sentence without hesitation. 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The decision ensured that Koberger would remain in prison for the rest of his life, with no opportunity for release. The ruling reflected both the severity of the crimes and the need for permanent accountability. With the sentence delivered, the legal process came to a close. The plea deal avoided years of court proceedings, appeals, and an uncertainty. For the families, it did not erase the loss, but it provided a final outcome and the end of the public legal battle. The case that had gripped the nation for months ended quietly compared to how it began. with a single decision in a courtroom that locked the suspect away for life.